I was actually born in Manchester at the old St Mary's, which is, I think, it's now a supermarket on the corner of Whitworth Street.
Yeah. What did your parents do for a living?
Well, my mother didn't work at the time. My father was he was a bleacher's labourer at a mill in Stockport.
Okay. What school did you go to? Did you go to school in the area that you were born?
No, I went to school in Stockport. I was born in Manchester, but I never lived in Manchester until now. I think the only reason I was born in Manchester, I can only assume that in those days when I was born, you only went to hospital if there's some complications. I can only assume there was some, I don't know. And they wouldn't have a maternity hospital in Stockport at that time, so I came up to Manchester.
That's why you were born in Manchester.
So I actually went to school in Edgeley in Stockport. The elementary school is where I went to.
So Manchester born but Stockport bred then? Did you do any work before enlisting, or was enlisting the first thing?
Well, I did a job to hear.
Sorry, did you work before you enlisted?
Oh yes, I started work when I was 14.
What did you do?
Apprentice plumber.
Alright, okay.
So then carried on doing plumbing for the next 51 years.
So, when did you join the armed forces?
In September 47.
Okay, and what was the reason for that?
National Service.
National Service, alright, okay. What was the name of your regiment or your unit?
Well, when I first went in to the basic training, you just go in the... you hadn't actually got a regiment, then you had to wait till you got posted till they selected what you wanted to go in. And being as I was a plumber, or apprentice, I obviously went into the Royal Engineers.
Alright, okay. Did you have much say into which unit you went into, or is it literally like you just said?
No,
because
a personnel selection officer selected you for they thought you'd be the best for.
And with plumbing you went into the engineers, okay. How long did you serve in the armed forces then? Did you do your national service and then...?
No, well, I did my national services, that was a total of 25 months.
Alright.
And then I had some years where I didn't do anything, and then I joined the Royal Observer Corps.
Okay. Can you describe your first memories of training when you joined the armed forces?
Shambles, I think, would be the best. It's only 6, you don't do much, you just square bashing, rifle drill, weapons range, this sort of thing. But, well, it wasn't bad at all.
Alright. Was you training in the northwest? Did you do
Chester.
Alright.
For the first 6 weeks. And then I went into #1 training regiment, Royal Engineers, well that's in Worcester, just outside Great Malvern. I spent a miserable 3 months.
What did you do in your training? Was it literally just what you said about with your...
In the engineers?
Yeah.
Bridges, roads, mine lifting and laying, explosives, booby traps, you name it. You know. Yeah. It's been very interesting actually, I enjoyed it in the RAs.
Well, that's good.
Didn't enjoy the training.
But after the training? So, the first time you went abroad, was that Palestine? That
was in January 48. I'd only been in the army, no, not 6 months then. And I sailed from Liverpool to Port Said in Egypt, which in those days took 10 days. I mean, don't know how long it takes to fly these days, but nothing like 10 days. I went down from Port Said by rail to Suez, a big transit camp, and from there I got posted to Palestine.
And this was while you were doing, this was part of your national service?
Oh yes, it's all national service.
What was it like abroad?
Interesting. I never really known what to describe the Palestine. It wasn't a war, you call it conflict or not. You know, we had problems, of course, because of the independence movements that were on. And, but as engineers, we weren't used really to fight.
Alright.
We were there in case we were required for engineering works. When we used to get called out to think like booby traps and landmines after an action. There was only once I ever got involved in actual fighting because we didn't normally do it.
Oh, and when was that? When you actually got involved?
Oh, this would be very shortly before the British Mandate finished. This would be March or April 1948.
And why did you have to get involved in that one and not in others?
Because it was one of the unusual ones where I'll refer to them as insurgents, were actually caught on the job. They derailed an ammunition train. In fact, they blew a culvert up, and British troops managed to get there while the insurgents were still there. And it was over a 12-hour fight, and it was thought that they laid booby traps or mines. This is why we went out to it. Well, they were still there when we got there, so we actually got involved with the fighting, which we didn't normally.
Oh, right.
Really, that was it.
And that was the only time?
It was the only time I came across, I shall put it, the enemy. Because they'd always gone by the time we got there.
You were the clear-up operation.
Yeah, so that was it.
How did you spend your time when you weren't serving? What did you do for recreation?
Well, never been a very sporting type. I didn't do any sports. Depending where we were, when I was in Palestine I couldn't go anywhere. But I spent most of my time reading or listening to the Forces radio.
Why in Palestine could you not go anywhere?
Sorry?
What, you said you couldn't go anywhere in Palestine. Why was that? Because of
the action, yeah. I mean, for instance, when I was a, people call me a dispatch rider, but I wasn't as a motorcyclist. You weren't allowed out on your own on a motorbike because you used to put wires across the road for you. So whenever I went doing convoy work, which I did, I always had to have a vehicle in front of me. I was never allowed to be the front man because they put trip wires or ropes across. Same thing with jeep drivers. It's same for them. But, it's a lovely country. I quite liked it. But so you couldn't go out anywhere. It was you just confined to camp, and that was it.
What about the food that you ate?
Sorry?
What about the food? How was that abroad?
Oh well, it wasn't bad at all. Except for one thing, I've never seen it in Civvy Street, and I never want to. We used to get dehydrated beetroot, if you can imagine it.
I'm not a fan of beetroot anyway, so...
Well, it was just like eating red velvet.
Oh.
It was dehydrated, they mixed it with water and it swelled up, and that was it. And you got that and a couple of sardines, and that was your tiffin, midday meal, you know. We had that every day for 7 months, which isn't...
Do you think what you did by serving in Palestine was worth it?
Sorry?
Do you think what you did serving in Palestine was worth it?
To me personally, yes, but whether we did any good is a different matter. Because we knew we were on our way out then, everybody knew we had a date for moving. And so, you know, so why they created so much trouble against us. You know, why they carried on fighting us, because they knew we were going. I mean, even, I think it was 3 days before we were actually moving, we knew we were going. Went through a village, which I always remember because the name stuck with me, called Telewinski. It was an Eastern European Jewish village. And the inhabitants were lining the road either side, like cheering or jeering, depending which way you wanted it. And as we came through the village, out of the corner of my eye, I saw somebody throw something. I went on my motorbike. I saw it coming and knew it was going to land near me. And I actually thought it was a hand grenade. It's not flying through the air, it's quick. And when it landed just in front of me, it was a tortoise, which they roam about wildly there like rabbits. But, yeah, if it had been a hand grenade, I wouldn't have been here today.
Did you agree with the conflict? Or the reasons as to why?
I found it, still find it hard to understand it. I think part of it was brought on by the British government's attitude after the First World War, was promising both the Arabs and the Jews a homeland. That's what kept them on, although they'd been, let's face it, they'd been at each other's throats for generations, but I don't think that we helped at all.
No.
And I will say we had no, in the area I was, depending where you were billeted, we had no problems at all with the Arabs. We did with the Jews.
Oh, right then.
But it just happened to be where you were. And, you must have seen the film of the Jewish immigrant ships coming from Cyprus, and we were turning them back. Well, I happened to go on one of those. That was a terrible thing, that was. Whereas these poor devils had come, a lot, some of them from concentration camps, coming over. And they pulled up there outside the beach, and we wouldn't let them off. And they were throwing stuff at us and calling us Nazis. And didn't go down very well at all. I didn't blame them at all.
So did they get turned back?
Oh, they got sent back,
yeah.
Back to Cyprus. Yeah. Must have been a terrible thing for them. They thought it was coming somewhere away from it all and fresh, and then they get there and not a lot. And the British don't let them alone.
Do you think they should have let them?
I don't know. No, I find it very... not being a politician at all, I don't know. You can understand the Arabs not wanting them to come, because they're going to... The Jews are obviously going to take over a lot of their land.
Yeah.
And the idea of getting so many Jews there was that they wouldn't be in the minority when they did come. Well, that's what the Arabs didn't want. They didn't want a Jewish majority. Anyway, let's face it, they're still at it now, 60 years later. So.
When you think about your service days, do you look back with fondness, or do you...
I don't know whether to say fondness, but I never regretted it. You know, it's a great experience. But most of the time, it's the good times you remember, really, let's face it. I quite enjoyed it. I wasn't very impressed with Egypt, I must admit. But Palestine I really liked.
Why didn't you like Egypt?
The conditions are in for a start. I mean, the day I got there to transit camp, I was issued with 3 7-inch wide pieces of wood, 6 foot long, and 2 little tiny metal trestles, which you put the wood on the trestles, and that was your bed. And given a sack and some straw, you know, that's it. And very intense. Well, with the heat and the flies, no, it's not. I often wonder, I don't know how the Egyptians managed once the British Army moved out, because it appeared that at least 90% of the population either worked for the British Army or stole from them. I don't know.
How long were you in Egypt for?
Not very long. 2 or 3 weeks the first time and a month or so the second, because we were in transit.
Oh, so it was on the way in, on the way back from Palestine?
Yeah.
So if you could sum up your experiences that you encountered, how do you feel about them?
I was glad to have experienced them.
Yeah.
You know, if I hadn't done my national service, I would never have done it. Because you've got to remember, it's over 60 years ago now, and people didn't go abroad. And I thought, in the forces, being sent overseas, this is going to be the only time in my life I'm going to go abroad. Of course, that's all gone today, everybody goes anywhere. But not then, you know. And you say it took 10 days to get there by sea. And even when I came back, which is from Tobruk, which is a few hundred miles nearer, and landed at Southampton, which is a lot nearer than up to Liverpool, it still took 10 days.
But you said you were in Libya. Was that around the same time that you were in Palestine, or was that?
No. When we finished in Palestine,
yeah,
went back down to Egypt for a very short period till we get another troop ship up to Benghazi, which I don't think really meant Libya. I mean, everybody thinks Libya. Libya is 2 provinces. You get Cyrenaica, which is what Benghazi was the capital of Cyrenaica, and then you go down the coast and it's Tripolitania and the capital is Tripoli, but the 2 together is Libya.
Oh right. So what did you do? What kind of work did you do in Libya? Was it the same with the engineers?
No, it mentions it in that thing. We spent 7 months building the biggest Bailey Bridge in North Africa because the original bridge had been blown during the war.
Right.
This is a place called Wadi El Kuf. We spent 7 months building this bridge. And then when we finished that, went back to Benghazi and we did various odds and ends, including something that the Mines Advisory Group do today. We were teaching civilian contractors how to lift landmines without getting killed. And we did that for a short while, a month or 2. And we lost 3 of our lads on the minefield. So,
in the whole time that you were in Libya?
Yeah, so the authorities decided that was enough. And that was it. And then after that it was just generally messing about. Not doing a lot at all. I did quite a lot on the motorbike doing convoy work. Some of it a bit harrowing because I used to take a lot of demob convoys from Benghazi up to Tobruk to get a troop ship. And they all went home and I was going back again. But, that was it.
You said before that it's easier to remember the good times, but what would you describe as your lowest point when you were serving, either in Libya or Palestine?
I think one of the very first things was when I saw my first dead British soldier who had been killed by a Jewish attack on it. And then the fact that I'd only been there 3 days, and it's a bit involved this, but I might as well tell you. There was 3 of us posted from Egypt up to this 23rd Field Squadron in Palestine. We'd only been there 3 days. On the morning parade, like in the your school register, we're in alphabetical order. On the morning parade they used to sort you out for various jobs for the day. And they got through to me, Rigby, cookhouse fatigues, I thought, scrubbing kitchen utensils, brilliant. Smith, my mate, and Williams, because they followed on in alphabetical order. Escort duty. So I thought they're going to be riding around the country at the back of a lorry, you know, hand scrubbing dishes. Well, they were, but they got ambushed. And Williams was killed and Smithy was wounded. I always think about if it hadn't been for the accident to my initial, I'd have been on that truck.
I'm thankful for scrubbing the utensils.
Yeah, all down to the accident of birth. Yeah. Anyway.
What about your highest point, or the one?
Well, some of the things I remember, like it's in Palestine, which you'd have to be there to appreciate this. But in the you know the NAFI, Naval Ambulance, we had a big NAFI there because at the camp, there's about 2,000 of us in this camp, it's a big camp, all sorts of units. And this particular night we're in there must have been 200 or 300 of us in, and somebody started singing Jerusalem, and the whole lot did. So there were 200 or 300 of us, and it sounded fantastic, it really did, you know. You didn't need to be religious to appreciate it.
Did you feel that your time serving affected you personally, or mentally?
Yes, I think it did. It should do, I think, anyway. Yeah.
In what way?
It's very hard to describe, but like you asked me what I thought about the situation in Palestine. I'd never have thought about it at all if I hadn't have been there to start with. It must have some effect on you. And something you don't forget, whether you liked it or not, was the discipline that was instilled in you. And, I must admit, I pride in my unit.
Did you receive any medals or awards?
Only the General Service Medal Palestine. And then I got a long service medal from the Observer Corps.
What did you do in the Observer Corps?
Observed. Well, I was on a post which is underground, and we had instruments. It was all to do with atomic warfare. We had instruments for measuring radiation and the size of the explosion and whatnot. And you were just down there in this hole in the ground looking at these instruments. Fortunately, we never used because there was no atomic war, fortunately. Most people think the Observer Corps they were during the war, where you're above ground with a pair of binoculars looking for aircraft. You don't do that when you're in a hole in the ground. Yeah.
What did your family think to you being in the armed forces?
I don't know, they never really said. My father, this sounds a little bit odd, when I got demobbed, national service, I was put on Z Reserve. My father was also on Z Reserved. We could have both been called up. I actually was in 51 just for a fortnight when there was some Cold War crisis, and they thought that the Russians were going to come down into what in those days was Persia, which never ran, to take the oil fields. Well, it so happened while I was still in Benghazi, we'd had a similar situation 2 or 3 years previously, and it was thought that we'd not be able to stop the Russians, they'd be too powerful. But we had to try and get there and stop them taking the oil fields. So we were sent on intensive training courses for blowing up oil fields, and, which never happened either. So I think that was one of the reasons I got called up, because we'd been trained for this previously.
So what did you do did you say it was 2 weeks?
Well, just basic RE training, a bit of bridging, a bit of mine laying,
but you didn't come
explosives, we didn't do anything, no.
Alright.
One thing that did strike me in those days, I didn't know they existed. It's a bit macabre really, whereas today you've got body bags. You haven't got body bags in those days. What we did have, but I didn't know till we started loading them up, was foldable, collapsible cardboard coffins. Don't think there's any of those left now. Never had to use any, fortunately.
So when did you leave the armed forces then?
Sorry?
When did you leave the armed forces?
In October 49.
49. And what did you do after the armed forces?
I did very little for a while, and then I joined the Royal Observer Corps, which I was in for 16.5 years till they stood us down when not this new white paper, the previous white paper some years ago.
And then what about when you left the Observers? What did you do then?
Well, I was already a volunteer at Museum of Science and Industry, so I carried on doing that. And I met someone at the Museum of Science and Industry who was a volunteer at the War Museum, and I volunteered for that, and I've been there since 84 I went there. I'm still there.
Did you find it hard to adjust to civilian life?
No, not really. It wasn't any long enough, was it?
Yeah.
And it was not like during the war, not like my father who did 5.5 years, you know. And my father volunteered immediately after Dunkirk in 1940, and he came out, I don't know what month it was, in 45, a month or two after the end of the war. So he did like full 5 years.
Did you make any lifelong friends that you served with? Or
not really, no. You tend, like you do with a lot of things, you start off full of enthusiasm, then gradually you just drift. I did meet one of the lads who was with in Egypt a couple of times when I was in Benghazi, because he'd got posted over to there, but then Didn't see him for over a year, and then I just happened to bump into him. And I've seen him since in Civvy Street. But he's still there now, I don't know. He was Welsh, and he lived in Llandudno. And my in-laws bought a hotel in Llandudno, and while I was there, I saw him. That's about it, really, I think.
Well, have you anything that you learned while you were in the armed forces? Have you applied that to life in Civvy Street? Is there anything that you've taken from that, or that's proved useful?
Not really, other than stuff that rubs off a bit at the War Museum. I'm on a thing called an information point, where we have some military objects on that the kids can come and look at and handle and whatnot. I'm able to answer questions on them because I've actually used them. It's a sort of thing. Because you get funny little things like, mention the Mines Advisory Group, and they look at you, and they say, "You're not a miners, do you?" I say, "Yes, it's where you get coal out of." You know, this sort of thing. I quite enjoy it. Something to do.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or?
Sorry?
Is there anything else you'd like to add or talk about?
No, I don't think so. You mentioned my father. He was in a combined Canadian and British group that discovered Belsen.
Really?
Where he got typhus. Because there was a typhus epidemic on at the time. Yeah. He never really said, the only thing he ever said about it, I remember, was that you could smell it half a mile away. And that was about it.